The downside is the arguments we have over how we see ourselves, and and were we, no, you weren't superior to anyone at all. You thought you were superior, and so older generations would argue about that. They're sticklers for that, but the younger generation say, they can accept that. I keep saying that we're pretentious and stuck up for no good reason. And when I've had a few drinks, I'll do it to wind up the rest of my family, particularly my brother or my sister, and Mum gets involved as well. We always agree to disagree, and we part our own way, and then another time we'll have the argument, and we'll all the same people have to know you're wrong and I'm right. And yes, it's that sort of thing. My name's Clifford DVaz, and I live in Walthamstow. My family, we've got 6 children, a mum and dad. My youngest brother was born in England in 1964. The rest of us were born in India. My parents were born in Bangalore. My grandparents were all born in South India, if not Bangalore. And we came over in 1963, December. It was Christmas Eve, 3 years old. It's just very hazy memories of a party on the boat, which I now subsequently found out was a Christmas party. I remember the waiters with their red jackets, bow ties, people with their masks that used to wear, and there was all dancing and music and that sort of thing. And the following day, meeting my dad, who had been here a year before us. So he was here a year before, preparing a home, working, getting things together. And we met him at Southampton docks. He was all standing outside. My dad bought coats for my sister because it was a very cold, bitter winter, 1963. My mum was crying because the snow would have been up to my knees, which is probably about, I don't know, 18 inches. So I remember the snow, my mum looking at the sky, and it was all grey, and thinking, this is it. For the rest of my life, I'll never see the sun again, just the grey sky. And she was crying, so she wasn't happy. And my dad did say to her, no, it will get warmer. I remember things like that, trying to cheer her up. But following year was a very, very hot summer. So my mum cheered up. So it was followed, that very cold winter was followed, and she realised that she didn't leave the sun behind. The sun does shine in England. So she was quite pleased about that. An Anglo-Indian originally was, the British couldn't control the whole of India. So what they'd done was they had this second-tier system of Anglo-Indians, where British officers from Europe, not necessarily Britain, would interbreed with the female Indians, Muslim, Hindu, doesn't matter, as long as the child was then a Christian. And those children were Anglo-Indians. That's the way it was. And they was paid handsomely as well to have these children with Indian women. The British needed enough people to help them to control the population of India. But they wanted somebody who was akin to them, like Christians, who had the same values as them. The British knew what they was doing. The Anglo-Indian system worked for them, helped them keep control of India for a lot longer. And the Anglo-Indians were handsomely rewarded by the British as well, with all the top jobs. It worked for the British anyway, it worked for them because it built up a big community. I mean, the Anglo-Indian community intermingled and mixed with themselves, so they just stayed as Christians. Anglo-Indians stuck to their own community. For some reason, and in my view, they always seemed to think that they was a cut above the rest, but they accepted their second-class status as below the British, but above the Indians. And as a youngster, growing up, older relatives would always say to me, you're not Indian, you're Anglo-Indian, as if it was some badge of honour, that you're higher class than the rest of the Indians. And it's only when I got older I thought to myself, well, this is not right, we're all human beings. They had no right to think that way, but the older ones still think that way. Unfortunately, they do. I remember when cousins of mine came over to Britain in about 1972, 73. And this is when it hit home to me that there was a difference. There was a young boy who wanted to play football with us. And I said, yes, you can play. And he said, no, he can't. I said, why not? He said, he's Indian. I said, well, so are we. And I thought, well, you can mix with people of different race, creeds and colours. This is England. And that's when it hit home to me that they did have this superiority complex. And I went back and I was speaking to my mum about it, and she said, yes, he's right, they are Indian. And she said, but it doesn't matter, in India it makes a big difference. Maybe, but not here. He didn't get that. And that's when it hit home to me that they have this superiority complex. Some still have it, unfortunately. We don't. It was controversial, yeah. But you have to take the ball, but you have to actually admit to it. If you don't admit to it, then you'll just continue thinking that you are something that you're not. You're more superior, and you're not. Tables have turned completely now. The Anglo-Indians, they're not as they used to be back in the day. Some lovely photos we have of black and white photos of us in India, and it was a big white house, servants in the background. You don't get that anymore. It's almost like when we came to England, we was told, you're coming to England because they're changing the dialect and we don't speak very good Hindi. Many situations we was told it was, well, you've done the British's dirty work for them, so you find it harder to get employment in India. So a lot of Anglo-Indians moved to Australia, Britain, Canada, America, economic migrants looking for work, and knowing that they would be treated better than perhaps they would be because they was helping the British to suppress the Indians back in the day. That might come back to bite you on the backside in a big way. So that's my understanding of why we came to England. Growing up in the 60s, it's a very vibrant place, London. You'd see people walking down the street with their beehives and their mini skirts and their flares and their loud shirts and what have you. The world had moved on, the war was finished in the 40s, and now Britain's just opening up now. And it was an exciting time to be in England, and Anglo-Indians, I suppose anyone from the Commonwealth that turned up here, you know, in those flower power days, they loved it. I suppose that's why the younger generation, it's like the shackles were off. We're in England now. We haven't got these shackles, you know, we're in Britain, you know, we can actually we look around, it's such a free world, you know, in Britain. There was a bit of racism, obviously, in those days, but apart from that, you can still do what you wanted to do. Now, you do get racism, but it was very far and few between. Our neighbours were always fantastic. Leytonstone, Walthamstow, wherever we moved, we always knew our next door neighbours. They'd come round our house, lovely people, always had great neighbours, so never had that kind of racism that you'd expect, or we're living next door to Indians and that sort of thing, but you see it and you hear about it and you know it exists. We were pretty fortunate, really, in that we didn't encounter that sort of thing, you know. I've got 3 older sisters and 2 younger brothers. Do my older sisters have more of an identity with Anglo-Indians? Yes, because my sisters still jive. There we go, I don't. I've got 2 left feet and I can't jive, but they will still jive. And I think, why do you jive? Because you was brought up in the glam rock, punk rock era, and why are you jiving? There's an Anglo-Indian dance every year, which we used to go to as children in Brent Town Hall, and all the Anglo-Indians would go there, and there'd be bands rather than discos. Jiving, they do their jiving, they have to practice jiving. These Anglo-Indian dances, when they do a jive, everyone gets up, the 2 women will jive together, even if they haven't got a partner, and, you know. So, I suppose music-wise, they haven't moved on, really. They haven't moved on, even to this day. I remember country and western music, I suppose, much as I hate it, because it was drummed into me as a kid. I seem to know every single word to every single Jim Reeves song. It's because my mum loved Jim Reeves, my dad loved Dean Martin, so it was that sort of music they'd like. But country and western is something that Anglo-Indians love. Every Sunday after church, we had to go to church on a Sunday. We went to church, got it out of the way. It was something that as a kid you wasn't interested in, but you have to go to church. So you'd go to church and you'd come back and mum would cook traditional Anglo-Indian food on a Sunday. Was ball curry and coconut rice with devil's chutney or something like that, pepper water, halyard, dosas, idlis, sambar. We still cook Anglo-Indian dishes. You mention pepper water, they'll say you're Anglo-Indian. It's something that's been handed on from generation to generation. We all know how to cook Anglo-Indian dishes, except for pepper water, which is very hard. So I'm still trying to get to the bottom of it. My mum how to cook pepper water. She's taught me most other cooking things. My wife's English. My children, they don't all consider themselves Anglo-Indians. My youngest son does, for some reason, I don't know why. But my other 2, they say they're mixed Indian. They don't call themselves Anglo-Indians. They just say mixed Indian. Yeah. They drop the Anglo. I don't know why. They wouldn't call themselves Anglo-Indians. So they say Dad's Indian, whereas my parents' generation, they insist on using the word Anglo. We're not Indian, we're Anglo-Indian. And I get that, so because I dropped the word Anglo some while ago, just to annoy some stuck-up members of my family, I just do it to wind people up. That's me. But we all love each other, really, so we do it just for fun. I do it for fun, but they don't know that. I never told them that. But now they're watching this, they might say, "Oh, so I see, so you really are an Anglo, and you just said that to annoy us, did you?" So there you go. Yeah, and I get it why Indigenous Indians have hang-ups about Anglo-Indians and their attitudes back in the day, but let's be honest, nowadays we've moved on, you know, and they're not like that so much. The older generation you can't change. The younger generation move with the times, they always do. the world over, not just in India and Anglo-Indians. They move with the times, they accept, they need jobs. They'll go to an Indian, they'll go to a Hindu, a Muslim or a Sikh employer, and they'll get jobs there. I'm recognising faults in my history, but it's faults that I suppose most people in other histories have. And the problem is that, I suppose for all other nationalities, you wouldn't argue with the older generations because you didn't want to offend them or upset them. And nowadays, we're more than happy to push the boundaries, and we're more happy to say, look, you're wrong and we're right, and this is why we're right. So we do push the boundaries, so to speak. It's not really pushing boundaries, but we're accepting that you've got to come into the 21st century and admit when you're wrong. But old school Anglo-Indians don't do that. They don't seem to admit when they're wrong. We accept that because we've grown up with it. You can argue with your uncles and your aunts and your parents, and you know, in the end, they're always going to be right even when they're wrong. You know, and we accept that. I suppose it's they call it respect. I call it just bloody mindedness. But there we go. I've got to flick that chip off my shoulder now. I can move on with my life. Yeah.